past week and a half or so has seen an outpouring of collective love and grief for Queen Elizabeth II. It's a sign of a truly remarkable life that Queen Elizabeth's passing has drawn tributes from the most unlikely places, even from Vladimir Putin. Even people who would not describe themselves as monarchists or royalists pay their tributes, such as the journalist Brendan O'Neill in The Spectator magazine, who suggested that she represented something incredibly important, embodying values that he suggests are at risk of extinction. He wrote, "She represented history in an era of anti-historical hysteria, forbearance in a time of narcissism, and public service in an era of self-worship and self-regard." It was also moving to read that the city of Paris, from a country whose relations with Britain have perhaps not been at their best in recent years, would turn off the lights of the Eiffel Tower for a whole night in her honor, reportedly bringing tears to many eyes in France, and to hear of President Macron's moving tribute to her as well. Today, in the light of the state funeral that will be taking place tomorrow, I thought it might be appropriate for us to reflect briefly on her life and what wisdom her life might offer to us all in this time of national grief. The first thing the life of Queen Elizabeth II reveals, I believe, is the power of presence. Simply showing up and being present for others and with others. In my early years of ministry, I remember having a conversation with a senior minister in our district. His words have lived with me down the years. He said to me, "Brian, always remember that 90% of ministry is about simply showing up and being present." In other words, only 10% depends on what you actually do or say. Simply showing up and being present with others in their joys and in their sorrows, and bringing a sense of God's presence to the ordinariness of people's lives. In our pastoral training as ministers, particularly at times of grief and sorrow, we were taught of what is sometimes called a ministry of presence. Because in times of grief and sorrow, words very quickly begin to sound shallow and feel inadequate. Often being with a person in their time of difficulty, grief and sorrow is far more important than any clever words that can be spoken. It would seem to me that Queen Elizabeth lived a ministry of presence to the people of the United Kingdom, and indeed to many people around the world. Her quiet, calm presence brought reassurance to many in the midst of people's joys and sorrows and national triumphs and struggles. Hers was a soft, quiet, and a gentle presence that was in the end more important than any words she was able to speak. Her job, in a sense, was simply to show up. How easy it sounds, and yet how difficult it often is, to show up at moments of national celebration, to show up at times of national tragedy, come rain or shine, to simply show up. It is the power of presence, the power of being with people, not in a dominating or an overbearing way, just a quiet, solid background presence. And that, I believe, brings us to the second reflection on her life. I believe, secondly, Queen Elizabeth II shows us the power of quiet, the power of quietness. In a world that has become more and more dominated by kind of the extroversions in recent decades, the Queen shows the power of quietness. Although she was clearly sociable, the Queen also gave the sense of being something of an introvert. And instead of this being an obstacle or an impediment to her, she used it as a strength, revealing the power of quietness. The Queen's popularity and the high esteem that many people held her in is perhaps most remarkable because she was a person who very seldom, if ever, expressed her own opinion publicly. I guess her role as monarch in a constitutional monarchy made it difficult for her to express a public opinion. I've often wondered how difficult that must have been for her, to sometimes see her own government taking positions on many things in her name that she may not have personally agreed with, and yet to hold back and not to say what she thought. This was not just the power of quietness, but also the power of restraint. Very few of us could probably say that we knew what she truly thought on many issues, both large and small. And perhaps that was part of her power, that she was not partisan, that she was queen and monarch for all her citizens, no matter who they were. And yet, in her quiet ministry of presence to the nation, she outlived and outlasted almost everyone, quietly representing a more enduring reality than the ups and downs of daily life and the chances and changes of everyday political reality. The power of presence, the power of quietness, and thirdly, I believe the power of humility. Despite being the Queen of the United Kingdom and the head of state of a number of other countries around the world, as well as the head of the Commonwealth, she gave the impression of being remarkably humble, with a remarkable ability to put ordinary people at ease in her presence. There are so many who have written of their brief encounters with the Queen that have revealed something of her humility. And I came across a story of Linda Sterling from Manchester, who met the Queen as a 15-year-old in 1998, when Her Majesty and Prince Philip opened a new building at Greycoat Hospital School for Girls in London. She said, I was a little nervous. I was in the science lab, we were showing experiments, and we had to talk to the Queen about what we were doing. I had to say the words, white, precipitate. But I couldn't get precipitate out, and I kept saying white, white, and stumbling. The Queen jumped in and said, white something. And I said yes, and caught her eye, and it made us both giggle. Then there is the story of how the Queen gatecrashed the retirement party for one of her favourite bodyguards. Richard Griffin shared how when he was retiring, the Queen invited him to have his retirement party in the State Department, and that he could invite 200 people. He shared that when he turned up with his family on the night, one of his colleagues said, "There's a little old lady coming to your party tonight." To which he replied, "What little old lady?" "The Queen," came the reply. He obviously had not felt himself worthy enough of inviting the Queen to attend his own retirement party, and she clearly had not thought of herself as being above the occasion, especially when at some point she must have heard that she had not been formally invited. And so she reveals the power of humility, the power of not being easily offended. Indeed, it is perhaps the fact that she did not take herself overly seriously that made her so loved by so many. As she herself is quoted as saying, "Let us not take ourselves too seriously. None of us has a monopoly on wisdom." Her humility and not taking herself too seriously is perhaps most epitomized in her famous tea with marmalade sandwiches with Paddington Bear just a few months ago during her Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And then lastly, The Queen showed the power of symbolic action. Her role as monarch put restrictions on her ability to express her opinion verbally, but it did not prevent her from expressing herself through the power of symbolic action. And she did so on a number of important occasions, such as the opening of her speech at Dublin Castle in 2011 in Irish Gaelic, and the following year in Belfast shaking the hand of Martin McGuinness as symbolic gestures of her commitment to reconciliation in Northern Ireland after the years of violence, alienation and trouble that so divided the people on this island, and which had not left her and her own family untouched. One might also think of the symbolic gesture of giving seeds from her garden to Naina Yeltsin during her 1994 visit of Russia, at a very difficult time of transition in Russia, when many were doing all in their power to thwart the reforms. The seeds were for Naina Yeltsin more than just a gift of friendship, but also perhaps symbols of hope for the future, hope for a changed and a transformed Russia that in many ways still needs to bear its full fruit in time. In reflecting on these four aspects of the Queen's life, they are not without religious significance for us as Christians. Indeed, Jesus himself reveals throughout the Gospels the power of simply being present with others in the midst of their joys and sorrows, triumphs and struggles. Jesus reveals the power that can often come from quietness and silence, as he bends down in silence before answering those who wish to stone the woman caught in adultery. Jesus reveals the power of humility, as he associated with many who others thought were beneath him, whether it was taking time out to be with little children and their mothers, laying his hands of blessing on them, or spending time eating meals with the outcasts and sinners of his day. The Apostle Paul sums up the power of Jesus' humility in the simple statement, though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor. And lastly, Jesus reveals the power of symbolic action as he rides into Jerusalem, not on a strong and powerful war horse, but rather on a donkey. Or as he takes bread and wine and shares them with his friends, saying, "This is my body. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." There's so much else that could be said in reflecting on Queen Elizabeth's life. The power of humor and being able to laugh with others and even chuckle at oneself. The power of keeping routines, like journaling at the end of every day, or attending church every Sunday, to draw strength from a power higher than herself. Or the power of taking time out, with little breaks during the day, to enjoy the simple pleasure of a cup of Earl Grey tea and something sweet. Or the power of living a life of purpose and service, living not just for herself and for her own glory, but also for the well-being of others, and especially the weak and the vulnerable, in her support of so many charities. I can imagine that Queen Elizabeth might well have said that hers, like all of ours, was not a perfect life, without its mistakes. But it is certainly true that she took the cards that life had dealt to her, and with them she sought to play her best hand. As she is laid to rest tomorrow in the state funeral, we do indeed pray that she may rest deeply in God's peace, and that she might hear those words spoken to her. "Well done, good and faithful servant. come and enjoy your master's happiness. Amen.